Hi, everybody. My name is John Palumbo, and I'm from Crossroads Church, and I'm the director of Freedom Ministry. And I want to thank you for tuning in to this series called Future Glory. And today we're going to be in part five of my story of how God transformed my life. And it's titled 1994, The Transformation Begins. Now, in part four, I spoke about how my mom remarried a guy named Michael in 1992. She met him around 1988, and he's the one that got me my job on the waterfront working on the Jersey piers. And then from there, I went to work for a plumbing shop. I learned how to do as a plumbing apprentice. I was learning the trade of being a plumber. But when they got married, they moved to New Jersey, and my mom was an old school Italian mother, and under those terms, you don't just move out and get your own apartment because you're 21 or 22 or 23 years old. You stay at home and you're married until you get married, and then you leave at a tux. But obviously at this point in my life, I wasn't even thinking about getting married. I wasn't looking to be getting married. So, I thought about getting my own apartment, and it just caused a little bit of a rift. So just to keep the peace, I followed to the New Jersey. I had to quit my job working in Brooklyn, but through a friend of mine that worked for this overnight express company, he was able to get me a job working with him. Not He worked in Manhattan, but it was a Kennedy Airport local. It was Teamsters Local 295, and they also represented Newark Airport. And he was able to get me a job working in Monmouth County, which is the county I was moving to, with this overnight express company. And once he did that, I was able to get it to the Teamsters, and living in New Jersey, like I says right now, and I'm still living my life the way I always lived my life. And when I worked for this company, there was a shop steward by the name of Charlie. Now, Charlie was about 20 years my senior, and I actually became good friends with Charlie. And he was originally from Brooklyn, and he was originally from Gravesend. He lived by Avenue P, and I lived by Avenue X, so not too far from each other. And similar stomping grounds. He knew some of the bars and the restaurants and the places that I went in the neighborhood. So we had that common ground, and we just basically bonded from there. Now, what I found out was at the time was, I didn't know when I first met him, but as I went along and got to know Charlie, I found out that him and his wife were born again Christians. And I told him about where I used to go to this Christian church called the Jerusalem Christian Church. I had gone to some Bible studies and I was familiar with it, but I wasn't ready yet to just turn my life and live for Jesus Christ. I was only in my early 20s, and I knew there were certain things I would have to give up and change my life around with, and I just wasn't ready to do that yet. But this was just the beginning because, like I said, in 1989, when I talked about my car accident in part three, I cried out to God that night. And I says, God, don't let me burn for an eternity. I thought I was going to die in that head on collision, okay, which I talk about in part three. And God took that seriously when I said, I don't want to burn. And He's been slowly but surely working His way into my life between going to these churches and going to Bible studies and asking these questions that I had, and what have you done for me lately? And I spoke about that in part four, and all these things together was God slowly but surely weeding His way into my life. And now I got Charlie, who's a born again Christian, that's talking to me, and on top of that, they gave me a route that was at Freehold, New Jersey, where I was making deliveries. Packers, an overnight express company, and one of the places that I delivered to in Freehold was a place called um, Sam's Sam's Club. And at Sam's Club, there was an optical department that I would deliver to. And one day I'm making my deliveries, and I hear them talking behind the counter, and somebody's talking about Jesus. So I asked him, I says, are you a Christian? And he told me he was. And he asked if I was. And I said, well, I told him the same thing. I've been to churches with the Bible studies, but I can't really say that I live for Jesus Christ or anything like that. He invited me to his church. I says thank you, but no thank you. His name was Richie, the guy. So, but I would see him every day when I would be making my deliveries and all that. And now I got a born again Christian on my route that I see, and every now and then I would ask Richie some questions. And not long after I got hired on this job, another guy was hired by the name of Tony. Tony was also about 20 years older than me. He came from Newark, New Jersey, I think by Bloomfield, an Italian neighborhood he grew up in Jersey. And we would talk about Brooklyn. He would talk about his neighborhood, and we would talk about like some of the Italian foods that we would grow up eating. Like he would talk about tripe and all these different things, which I never liked tripe. I never ever went near tripe. But Tony loved all these Italian delicacies and how, he lives in Tom's River now and he misses that. So one time I took Tony to Brooklyn with me to this bar in my neighborhood where it was like a bar and grill, and he had like a capuzzel, which is basically the head of the lamb, and he had some tripe, and we had a few beers, and like he just loved it. I introduced him to a lot of my friends. We went to one of my friends' house. We were drinking homemade wine. He just loved that Brooklyn in my neighborhood still had that ambiance to it. What I didn't know at the time was Tony's wife was actually a born again Christian also. I didn't find that out till years later. Now, Tony was me had a lot of things in common also in the sense of vices where we used to go out to a bar after work in the neighborhood where the garage was. It was in Wall Township. And there was times I would get out of work at, let's say, 4 in the afternoon, and I'd be in this bar till 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd have my dinner there, order a hamburger, whatever, and just be drinking beers and playing music. They're playing darts, whatever the case may be. Every shift from the job would eventually come in as the shifts were ending. Everybody would stop there for a couple of drinks. And there was times when I just closed the place and I would just drive home at 2 o'clock in the morning and tomorrow wake up and start all over again. Tony also had a liking for betting horses, which I did too. And a lot of times after work, we drive out to Monmouth County. We were in Monmouth County. We would drive to Monmouth Park, and we sometimes spend an afternoon betting a few horse races. And we actually became really, really good friends. Now, like I said, the guy Richie on my route, he was still inviting me to church, and I would continue to politely decline. Um, because every Sunday I would travel back and forth to Brooklyn because that's where my friends were. I would actually be in Brooklyn on Sunday. I would travel in on Friday night and I would stay. My cousin Frankie didn't want me coming in, going out with my friends, drinking and driving home to Jersey. So he would have me, he gave me a key to his apartment and I would sleep over at his apartment on the weekend. And so I would go out and I would stay there. And Frankie and his wife Eleanor, they were like my older brother and my older sister. Okay, very close to them, and they had this point in time they had a 10-year-old son, around 10, 11 years old. I'd say Anthony was. His name was Anthony, and I could relate to Anthony because he was an only child, and I was an only child. Um, so I used to try to take him out before I would come back to New Jersey. I would take him and his friends to the park, wherever they play basketball, whatever. I try to do things with him. I wanted him to learn the value of working for and making money. Not just giving the kid money to do things, but to work for it. So what I would tell him was, I would say, "Listen, Anthony, I'll give you $5, but I want you to wash my car." And he would take a garden hose and, to the best of his ability at 10 years old, he put some soap on the car, hose it down, whatever the case may be. And I would give him $5. I would give him some pocket money. Um, I actually became more of like an uncle to him, and he became more of like a nephew to me than we were actually cousins. Even to this day, he considers me his uncle, and I introduce him as my nephew because that's how close we were. Because I could relate to him, and he had a little bit of a hard life growing up too, here and there, and those things I could relate to. And about a year or so after this, Frankie and Eleanor had another baby named Danny, and I watched Danny grow up also. So I would be going back and forth every weekend to Brooklyn because that's where my life was. My family was there, my friends were there. Jersey, I lived, Jersey, I worked, but my heart was still in Brooklyn. Okay? Now, um, what happened was eventually my shift changed at work, and I ended up on a night shift where I would work from 2 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night. And I would, instead of doing deliveries, I was doing pickups. And after I was doing my pickup route, I would drive a big 24 straight job truck filled with containers to Newark Airport, where we would be delivering the containers where they'd be loaded onto the plane to be shipped out for overnight. When that happened, I kind of slowed down with going to Brooklyn as much because I was working at night. So sometimes I would go in on Saturday and I just come home on Sunday. Like I says, Eleanor had another baby at this time, so I wanted to give them their privacy. I didn't want to stay over their house as much. They had things going on, and I didn't want to intrude on them either. So it kind of slowed down a little bit after about maybe a year, around 1994. It kind of slowed down a little bit with me going back and forth. And at this point in time, I had met a girl around 1988. I met her in a bar. She was a neighborhood girl, and she lived in Sheepshead Bay. And we had an on again, off again relationship throughout this whole time period for about 5 years now. And basically, we weren't steady. She wasn't my girlfriend, but she was someone that I would call up every so often, every few months. And I'd say, listen, you want to get together? You want to go out? And no matter when I called her, I'm sure she went on with her life. She was obviously dating other guys. I was dating other girls. She became like a fallback girl to me. And I would call her up, and no matter when I called her up, she was always there for me. And we would do anything so special. We would go out, we'd have a good time, we'd laugh, we'd joke, no pressure, nothing steady, just two people enjoying each other's company. And we would have a few drinks, and we would usually end up the night in a motel. Okay. And the next day, we were both free to do whatever we wanted. If we wanted to see each other the following week, fine. If not, that was okay too. But what happened was, after these 5 years, because I never really wanted to get married, but I started to say to myself, um, I want something more. There was a part deep down inside of me that didn't want that normal family orientated, wife and all that, and like the Brady Bunch. There was a part of me deep down inside that really wanted that. But the problem was, I never thought I could meet a normal girl that I could have that with. I always figured that if I met a normal girl, good job, good family, good upbringing, she's going to see me with all my drama and my issues. She's going to say, what do I need this guy for? And when you have codependent behavior, one of the traits is you become a rescuer. You start looking for people that you can rescue. And I think that was what attracted me a lot to this girl, because I could relate to her. She had a lot of hurts in her life. She had walls that were higher than mine when it came to a fortress. And I thought about trying to get serious with her, and I asked her what she thought about that. And she wasn't in favor of it. And we had a long conversation, and she was like, why do you want to change things? Aren't I always there for you when you call me? Um, she was like, Johnny, and she said this with tears in her eyes. So if she was lying to me, she deserves an Academy Award. But she told me this with tears in her eyes. She says, I have a good time with you. I like being with you. And, she mentioned all my good qualities. But she says, I know you. Eventually, you're going to cheat on me. And she says, you could devastate me. She goes, you can't hurt me. You could devastate me, she said. And I was like, why would you think that? Because she knew deep down, I think maybe it was a woman's intuition, but she knew deep down that I wasn't really looking to get serious. It was just that I was getting older and she was available. And I was like, you know what, let's just see what happens. And it would have probably been a horrible mistake. And I think she saw that where it was coming from. And, although she entertained it, She wasn't going to feed into it. She didn't want to get serious. She didn't want to get married. She enjoyed having an open relationship. We had fun. We would go out. We'd have a few drinks. We'd have some laughs. No pressure. And she just didn't want to. She just didn't want it. So eventually, we started fading away. Now, once that happened, I had shared that Mike had died in 1993, and I also shared in the last part that my father was diagnosed with kidney failure, and he was taking dialysis. And I resumed my relationship with him, and I started talking to him. So as 1994 came, and I started evaluating my life, there was a lot of turning points going on. I was living in another state. I had a new job. Michael died. He was in my life. He's no longer in my life. I'm rebuilding my relationship with my father. And I no longer wanted, excuse me, and I no longer wanted this fly by night lustful relationship. I was starting to change. Like I said, God is starting to slowly, I didn't see it at the time, but God was working. He weeded this girl out of my life. And at the same time, he was weeding me back together with my father, knitting us back together in our relationship. He was starting to work. Um, in some ways, I felt that my life had direction and it was going someplace. But in other areas, I felt that it was stagnant. And I was just basically, I was going on 24 years old. And I felt that I was 25 actually at the time. And I just felt sometimes, some areas I was just wasting my life away. And I kept thinking to myself, does God have a better plan for me? Can God really have a better plan? So I called up Richie one day and I said, Richie, I called him at the Sam's Club and I says, I want to go to church with you. Where's your church? He told me it was called Calvary Chapel of Old Bridge in Old Bridge, New Jersey. And it was about 10 minutes from my house, coincidentally. And I went. I checked it out, and it was a little bit different. It was a little bit more conservative than New Jerusalem was, in a sense where New Jerusalem was a little more charismatic. But I liked it. And then my mom was a diehard Catholic. But she knew about these born again Christian churches. And I asked her, I said, would you want to come with me? I want to check this church out. And my mom came with me, and she liked it. And actually, my mom kept on going to this church. And eventually she found a smaller church where she was able to ask some questions and find out what the difference was between the born again Christian churches and the Catholic Church. And slowly but surely, my mom started really getting into it, and she started to transfer from praying like on rosary beads to she was gifted with the gift of tongues. Remember, they started praying in tongues. So for my mom, this was a great transformation, and it really kicked in for her. And for me, though, it wasn't as immediate. But like I said, slowly I was going to this church, I was checking it out. I no longer wanted these lustful relationships. I wasn't going back and forth to Brooklyn that much because of my shift. So I wasn't drinking as much on the weekends. Slowly but surely, things were happening. Now, in 1987, I took a civil service exam for New York City Department of Sanitation. And I was on the waiting list with a list number for them to call me. Now, in 1994, I knew that they were getting close to my list number, but I also knew that I needed to move back to New York if I wanted this job. So, in 1994, though I wasn't married, I had to break the Italian tradition, and I got a two-room, and I moved back to Staten Island, and I got a two-room studio. Okay. And I would travel back and forth from Staten Island to my job in Wall Township because I continued working, obviously. And then in 1995, I received a letter from the New York City Department of Sanitation telling me to go for my medical exam. I went for the medical, I passed the medical, and then in the summer of 1995, I was given an appointment date if I wanted the job. And I remember I spoke to Charlie, my shop steward, about this because this was going to be a big turning point in my life. I'm living in Staten Island now. I got my own apartment. I'm starting a whole new job again from scratch. And I asked Charlie. Charlie was from New York originally, from Brooklyn. He knew about the sanitation department. And he basically told me, John, if you don't take that job, you're out of your mind. And I said to myself, the guy's right. I waited all these years now from 1987 to 1995 to get called. Now I'm going to pass on it. So I took the job, and I went from being in local 295 to being to becoming a member of Teamsters Local 831. I had a 20-year pension when I was hired in my 20s. I could be retired in my 40s. My ship came in. I was assigned a garage in Brooklyn in the Bushwick area. From Staten Island, it was a long drive, so I decided to transfer closer to home. So I transferred to Bensonhurst. Now, my transfer to Bensonhurst came through on a Friday. I had to report to work in Bensonhurst on a Saturday. I went out with my friends on Saturday night, I should say on Friday night, and we were in a bar in Bay Ridge, and I left at around 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't drive home to Staten Island because I had to be at work by 6 for roll call. I pulled up to the garage and I parked the car, engine running, headlights still on, and I just fell asleep in the car. Come 6 a.m. roll call, I'm still in my car sleeping. Somebody saw the car with the headlights on. They came out, they woke me up, and that was my first day in my new garage. Showed up, passed out, sleeping in my car. Late, my first day. Talk about your first impressions, and that just goes to show you that, like I said in the last part, that the way I drank, we had random drug testing and all that stuff and breathalyzers. I just knew it was only going to be a matter of time before I threw this job away. So I want you to tune in to part 6, if you can, which I titled 1995 Romans 8:18. And I'll explain what that means in part 6. Thanks for tuning in.